So for this project, I decided to get set up at the craft table with a beer and some paper. We're going to sit down and make a book. I've got some 9x12 sheets of multimedia art paper, mixed media I should say, folding them in half to make a 6x9 book. I'm folding them into sets of 4 at a time. These are called signatures. I'm going to have 5 signatures, and the whole purpose of signatures is to keep the book from being weird shaped, from having a stack of paper way too deep. Once it's all folded up and organized, we start marking the back. Of course, having a drink of beer first always helps. The center's found, and then in 1-inch increments out from the center, I make a mark on the first signature. I line this one up with the rest, and then I transfer the marks using a straight edge. The marks serve as a place to poke holes, and you may notice this if you see my other videos. That is my brass scribe that I made. It's got a sewing needle in it, so it's pretty ideal for poking a hole through 4 sheets of this thicker multimedia paper. Once all the holes are poked, we can sew the signatures together and bind the text block of the book. This is a pretty straightforward method I learned from watching videos from a channel called Sea Lemon. Sea Lemon is a channel, she does a lot of really neat DIY stuff and has a lot of really comprehensive and in-depth bookbinding videos. So if you like this but would like a little bit better how-to as to the actual basics of it, definitely check out her channel. But the stitch along the back, you start with the first signature and you run it through very much just like sewing up any 2 pieces of fabric together. Over and then under, and then over and then under. Once that's done, you'll basically go back through so that you enclose all of the open stitches, if that makes sense, so they don't look offset as you're kind of noticing here. It definitely feels a little janky at first, and it can be really tedious to get all that string through, which I'm just using some sewing thread that I borrowed from my wife. With that done, you can loop it around the very first hole that you went through, locking up the first signature tight, and then you'll go through the first hole of the second signature, and you'll come out the second hole, and we're just going to make a loop. We're going to loop through the string that we tied around in the first signature, and then go back through the same hole that we just came out of on the second signature, if that makes any sense. So from the inside of the signature out, through the binding of the first signature, and back through the hole you came out of in the second signature. And just repeat that many times. Once you've got all the signatures tied together, sewn together, and bound, you can run some loops through that very last hole and complete your binding. This basically consists of just running your thread through and looping it around the string a couple of times, basically tying a knot throughout your stitch. With that, we trim off the threads, and that's the binding right there, for the most part, at least the thread part of the binding. It's not as hard as it seems. It's tedious for sure, but it's very solid, especially once it's all done. It's kind of unbelievable how solid it all comes together. The next part we have to do is glue the edges. PVA glue is what bookbinders use, and I found out that we had that in the house. It's just called tacky glue, or tacky glue is a form of it. So I spread it on with an acid brush on the back. This is my makeshift book binding press, which is 2 pieces of wood and some clamps. Would work just fine for me, but we're going to apply 2 coats of the tacky glue. Let 1 coat soak in, and then I went ahead and applied another one, and let this all dry out and cure pretty well. That makes a nice solid edge and adds a lot of strength to the bound book. This way, just in case a thread's broken or something, it won't come undone. While we're doing this, I figured I'd add a ribbon, a built-in built-in bookmark. I don't know if that has an official bookbinding-y name, but it's a ribbon. Once all that glue's dried, we can start with the cover pages. And these are what actually hold the text block of the book to the cover. And this is just some nice paper I got from the craft store. I thought it was pretty cool looking. But folding those in half just like the rest of the pages, and then we're just going to glue them on the outside next to the binding for now. And this is a part of the book where you can really be really creative. I was really hoping I could find some magazines or pieces out of an old recipe book or something I could use, but I also am really happy with these. You could also just glue the first and last page as far as I know, unless you have text on there. once the glue's applied and everything's kind of set in place, we'll use my bookbinding press once again. Patent pending, of course. Now we're going to actually start on the cover of the book, and this is pretty fun. So the material I'm using, these are just a couple of pieces of cardboard out of a relatively lightweight cardboard box. So this is recycled. And then the material that I'm gluing the cardboard to is called Craftex. Now Craftex is a really neat material that my wife got. It cuts and feels like paper, but at the same time also a lot like leather. And it wears like leather. It'll develop creases and wear patterns like leather as it ages and gets used. The best, I don't know if it's a comparison or it's actual literally true, but it's basically the stuff that if you have a pair of jeans, especially like Levi's jeans, this is what the tag's made out of. So it's a really neat material, and you can make the cover of a book out of a lot of different materials: synthetic, leather, cloth, anything, papers of various types. I just chose this because I wanted it to have kind of a soft cover with a little bit of rigidity and wanted to kind of wear nicely. Kind of like a big moleskin. So to get it all glued down, I'm using a bunch of various weights out of my shop, some very clean metals, and a basket lid that I'm being very careful with, just to apply pressure over all this surface. And while that's drying, we can go ahead and trim up some of this material on the outside. You really don't need hardly much more than just the dimensions of the book. After that's dried for about an hour or so, just do some very, very minor touch-ups. And then one thing that's necessary, and I've seen some very fancy ways to do this, I did it a very basic way, but you cut out these corners around the edges. Or you cut out these corners around the corners, I should say. And this will allow us to fold the book over. And basically, the rule I followed is just making the cut itself greater than 90 degrees. And then we just glue down the flaps. This part can be a little tricky depending on what sort of material you're using, especially if it's a thicker material or one with a little bit of spring in it. So for this first flap, I just tried using my fingers, which worked. I mean, I got it there. But in the subsequent ones, you'll see me using the straight edge to actually fold it over. And then something that occurred to me, and I've seen done, of course, after I made the book, was pre-folding your flaps, getting that crease in there first, which is, of course, probably the significantly smarter way to do it. The benefits of having a really cluttery workbench area in your craft room is that you have a lot of weights you can use to hold down stuff like glued book covers. Everything you need's within arm's reach. Sometimes even closer. With all the glue dried around the cover, I'm making some cuts here. And I've got some elastic band, so it just makes some cuts to fit it through. And I've seen this done a number of ways where you actually cut a little relief pocket for the band so that it doesn't poke out or anything, the ends of the band on the inside of the cover, but everything was so thin that I'm not Not really worried about it. It didn't seem to affect anything. Just hot glued the ends of the band down, and this will be our elastic... I don't know if a fancy word for it. It's an elastic band that holds the book closed. And this hot melt hot glue, which, yeah, I'm a huge fan of hot glue. It's it's just great. Just like that. Now to glue the actual text block into the cover, you can see why we have those cover pages, the fancy ones. We glue every last bit of them to the outside of the cover, and I don't know, learning this process, you can look at a bound book and things make a little bit more sense as to the kind of the hows and whys of their construction. But this part is basically just as easy as just applying a lot of glue, holding it down for a bit, and then applying more glue and holding the whole thing down. And with that, it's basically done. That's the entire process. So this came out really nice. I was happy with it. It was a Christmas gift for my little sister, and she was happy with it too, which made me really, really happy. So that's cool. But this wasn't a very difficult project. Well, it was tedious. It wasn't as difficult as it would initially strike somebody. But it was a lot of fun to do, and I'd like to do some more in the future. I like making books. I like books. But I'd like to thank Jimmy DiResta and Sea Lemon, those two channels. If you haven't heard of them, go look them up, because they taught me kind of the ins and outs of this and made it realistic for me. So anyway, thank you for watching.